Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. Sorry we're a little bit late. Had to prepare all these clips for you. This nonstop compilation of ghoulish behavior from our corporate media overlords. It's another insane week of coverage, but thanks for being here to bear it with us.
Yes. Thank you for joining. Sorry and thank you. Yeah.
And remember, usefulidiots.podcast.com is where you can go to support the show and get bonus content. And I guess we'll hit it.
And this week's show was so good. Make sure you do join because Rashid Khalidi was such a great guest. And he also beautifully debunks this ridiculous claim in The Atlantic that Israel was not created through settler colonialism. And he is an expert on settler colonialism. So make sure you check that out. And he's just a really fun interview, too. As funny as you can be during this time period. Alrighty. So let's get to it, and let's start with Meet the Press. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Good Sunday morning from Miami, where we will be hosting the third Republican presidential debate on Wednesday night, with foreign policy front and center. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unannounced visit this morning to the Israeli-occupied West Bank to meet with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. It comes as the war in Ukraine is raging, the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. Russia now controls about 18% of Ukraine. 18% of the U.S. would be about the size of Alaska or 4 Californias. This includes Crimea and part of eastern Ukraine, which Russia has occupied since 2014.
This is a good reminder that, there's a whole other war going on. The one that dominated news for nearly 2 years up until this mass murder campaign by Israel began after the Hamas attack of October 7th. And since then, Ukraine has been kicked to the curb. We haven't heard pretty much anything about it. It's like we went from saying this was like a fight for the future of the world. Ukraine was on the front lines of defending democracy to Ukraine. We don't really care anymore.
Yeah.
And all the news we've gotten, the trickle of news we've gotten from Ukraine recently has not been very good for the proxy war side.
Right.
As we're going to get into.
Yeah. This war, this not less war, more genocidal attack on Palestine, though, really makes me miss the proxy war. If only we were involved in just that war and not this other one.
Well, yeah, first of all, already in just over 3 weeks, Israel's already killed officially more people than Russia is accused of killing in Ukraine. That includes more children. Israel's killed more children in just over 3 weeks than Russia is accused of killing in nearly 2 years. And yet, when Russia was killing people, we were told this is a genocide. We have to do everything we can to stop it. Right now in Israel, the death toll is already higher, and yet we're the ones fueling it, supporting it, cheering it on, blocking any efforts to stall it, not even supporting a humanitarian pause to even interrupt the mass killing. It has to continue unimpeded.
Right.
That's where we're at.
And guys, tweet this out if you're watching. We want to bring people to watch this because this is an important one.
And look, again, I've said this before, at least in Ukraine, if you want to continue that war rather than support diplomatic options, which the U.S. has blocked both before and after the war began, if that's your position, at least you can make the case there that Ukraine is fighting a serious adversary. They're fighting one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Okay, if you don't want to have peace, then at least Ukraine is fighting someone who can really do damage to Ukraine. So you can make the case there that we have to arm them if you really don't want to pursue diplomacy, which of course was undermined at every turn by the U.S.
And would save more Ukrainian lives, of course.
Yes, but whatever. But at least militarily, they're a serious adversary. They have nuclear weapons. They're a major power. So, okay, make the case there. But in Gaza, who is Israel fighting? It's a defenseless population with no air defenses whatsoever. And Israel is dropping, 90% of Israel's bombs are between 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. These are massive bombs on this densely populated, tiny little strip of land, not a country like Ukraine, a little strip of land that's being pounded mercilessly. And that's why we're seeing already so much death and destruction, because they can't fight back and they're packed into a small little concentration camp.
Awful.
It's a war which many predicted Russia would quickly dominate. Instead, has been drawn into what one of Ukraine's top generals called a stalemate. NBC News now reporting U.S. and European officials have begun quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might entail to end the war.
Wow, you see that, Katie? The U.S. finally, apparently, supports peace negotiations. Only nearly 2 years into this thing, and after tens of thousands of lives.
Right.
Not the peace negotiations that could have happened before the war in December 2021, when Russia offered these draft treaties to the U.S. and NATO, which were dismissed out of hand. And meanwhile, and not the peace negotiations that happened in March, April 2022, when there was a deal reached between Ukraine and Russia, which the UK and the US stepped in to block. So now finally, after all these lives lost, Ukraine, as was just said, has lost 18% of its territory. Now, apparently, we can finally talk about peace negotiations.
Yeah. I mean, we always knew this would happen. And, you know, Phyllis Bennis wrote a piece saying, wars always end through negotiation. The only question is how many people have to die first. So I'm glad they waited this long.
Yeah, well, in the case of Ukraine, 0 people could have died if the U.S. had accepted diplomacy before the war, which would have meant negotiating with Russia and also accepting the Minsk Accords, which was the peace deal reached in 2015 to stop the Donbass war that is at the heart of all this, which the U.S. and Ukraine's far right undermined. We've talked about that a lot. And then after the war, you had the March, April 22 negotiations, which the U.S. and UK blocked. So now finally, after all the senseless death, now finally, because Ukraine is this widely hyped counteroffensive was a failure. They barely got any territory from it. And maybe they even lost more territory. Now, finally, we can talk about peace negotiations. And whatever Ukraine gets, there's no way they will get as good a deal as they could have gotten before the war, which is keeping all their territory, just granting the Donbass some limited autonomy. And the same thing actually after the war, too. They could have kept all their territory except for Crimea if they had just given the Donbass some autonomy and committed to respecting the Russian oriented people of Ukraine who identify with Russia, not trying to ban their language, and also not joining NATO, which, by the way, they're not going to get anyway. So the U.S. dangled NATO to Ukraine and probably won't even let them join anyway. And this is the deal that Ukraine will get now that the U.S. is finally willing to accept peace negotiations, because I suppose they're tired of this war. They've bled Russia enough. And also they want to focus now on helping Israel kill people in Gaza.
I'm trying to find something uplifting to say or clever. There really isn't anything. Luckily, we have more content for you.
We have a lot more material coming up, including Zelenskyy himself.
Yeah.
President Biden has proposed $105 billion in emergency support for Ukraine, Israel, and other national security threats. But Republican support for the war is flagging. On Thursday, the Republican-led House passed a $14 billion bill in military aid for Israel alone. A bill the White House says the president will veto. The newly installed House Speaker responded.
We have obligations and we have things that we can and should do around the world, but we have to take care of our own house first. If we're going to take care of a border in Ukraine, we need to take care of America's border as well.
On Saturday, I sat down with an emotional President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who spoke to me in both Ukrainian and English and acknowledged his people are tired but undeterred. His plea to U.S. lawmakers: give Ukraine one more year of aid and it will be able to close its funding gap. Or, he warned, the price for the United States will be even higher.
Yeah, so she describes Zelenskyy as emotional. There was just an article this week in Time magazine, a front page cover story. And Time magazine last year declared Zelenskyy the person of the year. And this week, the same journalist who wrote that story, that cover story about Zelenskyy being the person of the year, wrote a follow-up interviewing all Zelenskyy's top aides and Zelenskyy himself. And the takeaway from that story is that Zelenskyy is not emotional. He's delusional. That's literally what one of his aides said. He said,
Right.
quote, he deludes himself, and we can't talk to him about what's going on. We can't tell him that we're losing. We can't tell him we should have peace negotiations because he doesn't want to hear it. So that's the state of the former
Right.
person of the year, the former global hero, man of the hour, the next incarnation of Winston Churchill, Zelenskyy, who is now delusional, according to his own aides.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he's probably emotional too, but she did leave out that under that emotionality, we got some delusion. It's kind of a partial diagnosis that she made there.
But let's take a look. Here is Zelenskyy himself.
Do you believe Israel is following international law?
Дивіться, знаєте, я вам скажу відверто.
I have to be sincere. We are looking at this situation like as if something new.
А це абсолютно не нова.
It's not a new situation at all.
Це вогонь,
It's
як я вам і сказав, який
a fire that has been burning between Israel and Palestine. And
So you're not crazy or not hearing something if you were asking yourself, wait, wasn't he asked a specific question about war crimes that he's not answering? He's not answering. Okay.
No, he can't answer it because, for all the posturing about how he's standing up to tyranny, standing up to occupation. No, he's just a neocon tool, taking orders and sacrificing his country for the goal of bleeding Russia, which will make him rich. He'll get rewarded one day whenever this is over. He'll go off and live somewhere comfortably in exile, I bet. Just as he's sacrificing his country for U.S. hegemony, Israel's in a similar position. It's also a U.S. client state. And his problem now is that Israel's been a U.S. client state for a lot longer than Ukraine has. Ukraine's only been a U.S. client state since 2014 after the Maidan coup. Israel's been a U.S. client state since 1967. So Israel has a lot more friends in the bipartisan foreign policy establishment than Ukraine does, even at this point. And Israel's provided reliable services for the U.S. for many, many years. And Israel's coming first right now, and he's feeling the brunt of that. But he can't criticize Israel because he's a part of the same
Right.
U.S. client club.
But also because he himself said, remember, that he wanted Ukraine to be like Israel?
He did, and he wanted to go visit Israel to keep himself relevant. He wanted to go visit Israel after October 7th, but Israel said no because his brand isn't so hot right now. It's not his moment anymore.
Right.
And some people are still throwing matches into this fire, and I'm sure that Russia was behind and sponsoring Hamas and Iran too. That's
So you hear that, everybody? Now we have Russia blamed for a brand new thing, which is October 7th. He says, I'm sure Russia was behind Hamas. So we're used to blaming Russia for everything in the U.S., Donald Trump winning, racism in the U.S., that's also Russia's fault. And now apparently, according to Zelenskyy, October 7th was also Russia's fault. The Russians,
It was part of the plan. It's part,
for?
this was, this was straight out, the October 7th thing was straight out of the RPB, Russia playbook. Yeah.
The RPB. Absolutely. Absolutely.
who is to blame. When we talk about rules, where there are terrorists, there are no rules. Everything is beyond laws. Everybody is trying to save their own lives. And
so that's kind of his trying to circle back to the question and basically excuse war crimes, because where there are terrorists, there are no laws. That's what he's trying to say, which is convenient not just for Israel, but also for Ukraine, for when they commit war crimes. Because if Putin's a terrorist, hard not to commit war crimes. If Hamas are terrorists, hard not to commit war crimes. Of course, that's not actually how war crimes work. You're supposed to not commit them even when fighting terrorism, or else you become a terrorist.
fight against the enemy using all the efforts, all the forces. First, in order to finish this war and sit down at the negotiation table, you have to finish, you have to exert pressure on Russia and Iran. You have to admit that these countries are behind these processes. And I would also add North Korea there. You saw how many North Korean munitions were found in Gaza.
It's so pathetic. He's like trying to do a new axis of evil, like axis of evil 2.0.
Yeah, so he's already thrown in Russia and Iran. Now he's throwing in North Korea. He's saying that North Korea is arming Hamas. And it makes sense that he's sounding like a deranged Bush era neocon, because that's who he's working for, basically. That's whose bidding he's doing. It's such a joke. The same people who were always opposed to a diplomatic solution inside Ukraine, opposed to a ceasefire, opposed to peace negotiations, exact same people are now calling for carpet bombing Gaza. And that's who Zelenskyy is working for. And it's amazing this guy was once considered some sort of global hero, rather than the person who completely betrayed his own country by, instead of accepting a peaceful resolution, which he could have done early on in this war, even before this war, certainly early on as well. He decided to keep fighting. He followed US UK orders and couldn't stand up to his own far right as well. And now here we are. Now he's sounding like a complete typical neocon lunatic.
Yeah, and he's looking all over the room too, which is kind of chaotic. He needs some media prep.
Absolute fact, and it's difficult, of course. The main thing is that if terrorists are attacking, if terrorists attack, if they behead children, you have full right to defend people and defend your own country.
Okay, so that's an endorsement there of the debunked lie that Hamas beheaded dozens of babies. So he's still pushing that too. Maybe he's the last person left who's still saying that. Everyone else has moved on, because that was another, case of atrocity propaganda to justify committing atrocities against people of Gaza. But Zelenskyy is still a believer in that one. He hasn't gotten the memo that one was debunked a while ago. Let's move on, because now Zelenskyy is going to be asked about this report that came out this week from NBC News that, U.S., okay, after blocking diplomacy for nearly 2 years, maybe finally actually they're ready for some peace talks with Russia.
President Zelenskyy, NBC News is reporting that U.S. and European officials have begun quietly talking to your government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might look like to end this war. Have you personally been involved in these talks? And what's the status of these talks?
A lot of different voices around us. I heard a lot of different voices and emotions. And
this is Zelenskyy doing some spoken word poetry, by the way.
And without any concretic and propositions, a lot of different things. But as for me, I don't have, for today, I don't have any relations with Russians. And they know my position. That is the position of my country. That is the position of our people. We don't want to make any dialogue with terrorists. And the President of the United States and Congress, bipartisan support, all these people, they know that I am not ready to speak with the terrorists because their word is nothing. Nothing. We can't trust terrorists because terrorists always come back.
Yeah. Okay. So he sounds like George W. Bush there. We can't talk to the terrorists. They have to be crushed. Meanwhile, he is just sacrificing his own people for this fruitless goal that his own aides are now saying is impossible. His own aides say, if you read that Time magazine article, they say, we're losing, but we can't tell him that because he won't listen. He won't even listen to the idea of peace talks. So when he says there in that clip that he's hearing different voices, that sounds actually like that's like an honest answer. He does sound like he's lost it enough that maybe he is hearing voices.
Right.
And the same voices in his head that are telling him he's some sort of wartime hero that got him to this point, appealing to his ego. It sounds like he's now hearing those voices in his own head. And maybe someone should help him out because it's only his country that's suffering as a result.
Yeah, it's a cry for help.
Okay, well, more
Zelenskyy, yeah. Don't worry, guys.
But here's another issue that he came up. So his own aide said he's deluded. And then the head of Ukrainian armed forces, Zelenskyy, said that the war is a stalemate. He admitted that this week. So now Zelensky's going to be asked about that.
The strategy of this war this summer, and you reiterated right now, the progress has been slower than desired. And recently, one of your top generals said Ukraine has, quote, reached a stalemate. Has the war reached a stalemate?
Christian, you know, on the 24th of February, when Russia invaded our cities, country, our land, our families, and they attacked all of us, the world gave us 3 days. Some European countries who really believed in us, they said 1 month. Others said it will be very quick. And this is really this situation, what they said. But now we speak with you. Now it's almost 2 years. Now initiative in our hands. Yes, a lot of people, of course, in the world are tired. Of course, it's understandable. Somebody tired on the battlefield, somebody tired on their works, and somebody tired abroad. They want to come back home to their husbands, to their soldiers, to these guys, women and children. Somebody tired from European leaders to support Ukraine. Yes, of course, because long war.
I hear you rejecting the characterization by your top general that this is a stalemate. Are you changing strategies, as has been reported?
Я вважаю, що сьогодні
I believe that
Just like, so who are we supposed to believe? We're supposed to believe this guy or his top general
Right.
who's saying it's a stalemate? Like, who has a more accurate grasp on reality at this point? This guy, this unhinged character who really thinks he's some sort of wartime hero, or his top general who's actually leading his armed forces? And
He may know better.
yeah. That's the premise we're supposed to accept here, is that Zelenskyy knows better. And again, he didn't answer the question. He's talking. He's like, I know people are tired. Yeah, of course people are tired, but that's not the question. Is militarily, are we at a stalemate?
Right.
And what's the point of keeping this going? They can't answer that.
He's going to offer some sleep hygiene tips.
Yes, there we go. That's what he has to offer. Okay, let's do one more Zelenskyy clip.
If you want to share, before you go, if you want to share, what keeps you going? Do you ever feel defeated?
I have a lot of power. But
I have a lot of power. I mean, again, this is supposed to be this wartime hero who saved his country, who we're all supposed to worship and line up against. And this is what he's been reduced to.
Well,
Assuring us he has a lot of power. Okay, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do, buddy.
we know what his theme song would be. I
What's
got
that?
the power.
There we go.
Deep
Yes.
cut.
Yes.
Listen, right
even feeling strong and have a lot of energy, it doesn't mean that we want to fight all our life, because the price is high, like I said, because the war takes the best of us, the best heroes, the best men, women, children. That's it. But we are not ready to give our freedom to this terrorist Putin. That's it. That's why we are fighting. That's it.
President Zelenskyy, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate
And thanks so much for that F-bomb too.
Yeah, and he's
It's a
so
great F-bomb.
see, after he dropped it, he's like really impressed with himself. Remember,
Somebody
he's
in
an
the chat-
actor. He's an actor.
He is an actor.
Like
And
comedian.
he was a great actor. He should have stayed in that
Yeah.
location, I think, rather than trying to lead a country that was caught between a geopolitical war between the U.S. and Russia. And I think he would have been way better for himself and his country if he stayed an actor.
Yeah.
You know, somebody in the chat made a joke that he says there, I have a lot of power. I think what he meant to say, comes from the chat, whoever said this, very funny. I have a lot of powder.
Oh yeah,
That's what
I-
maybe he
yeah.
meant to say.
and they're not talking about makeup, are they?
No, they're not. No. Okay, let's move on to John Feiner. He is a White House official, and he's here to tell us that the Biden administration is doing all it can to support the people of Gaza, all while meanwhile it's arming Israel to mass murder them.
Pointed questions. How about those pointed questions Ian panel ended with? Are the goals of the Israeli government achievable? And what does the day after look like?
Okay, unrelated, but he kind of has a boy band look to him with the hair and the goatee.
I mean, young man definitely comes up for me. I don't know about boy band, but certainly he has a young look, this guy. But
yeah,
look at that question from George Stephanopoulos, whatever his name is. Pointed questions. Are Israeli goals achievable? Like, that's the toughest question we can ask. Like, is this mass murder campaign, can they achieve its goals? Like, how about, do we have the right to kill children and women and fathers and all these innocent people who are dying by the thousands with our weapons? How about that?
Hitler's plan, doable?
Exactly.
Unclear. Yeah.
And, you know, how about, do we have the right to be backing an occupying power, bombarding the strip it's occupying?
Right.
I mean, that could maybe be a pointed question. It's always the toughest we can ask is, can we achieve the goal, which presupposes that we have the right to be carrying out the policy in the first place, which we never ever question.
Right.
I'll let the Israeli government speak to its own objectives. What I think we believe and feel strongly is that Gaza cannot and should not be allowed to be a platform from which horrific terrorist attacks can be conducted against Israel. And so to the extent that they are seeking to make that no longer possible, that is both a very legitimate and we believe an achievable goal.
How about Israel being a platform from which to launch terror attacks on Gaza?
Right. Well, they're right. They have our backing, so they're inherently not terrorists, Aaron, because we don't support terrorists.
Beyond that, what comes on the day after, I think we've also started to speak to. We cannot go back to a pre-October 7th environment in Gaza.
I like that callback to, like, remember Bush used to talk about a pre-9/11 world?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always heartened when people in this context are basically being Bushian, because that's what we need. We need more neocon, interventionist tendencies to wreak havoc on the world, make us less safe, make the world less safe, commit tons of war crimes, and create, actual terrorism.
Well, where it can threaten Israel in that way. But the president has also said we cannot go back to a pre-October mindset when it comes to Palestinian governance overall, including in the West Bank, including in Gaza. And that means resuming the urgent work of giving a political horizon to the Palestinian people, which...
Wow, a political horizon to the Palestinian people. That sounds so exciting. I'm sure
that's so humane and generous.
Political horizon. Yes. I can see the horizon over there.
Yeah.
This is always what it's been. Basically, whenever a U.S. leader wants to avoid dealing with the fundamental problem, which is the occupation and displacement of Palestinians, which none of these people want to do anything about. They're always talking about a vision in the future. Like George W. Bush would talk about a vision. He's like, I have a vision of a Palestinian state. It's over there somewhere. It's a vision long in the distance. Obama did the same thing. We have to see a future. No, there's an occupation going on right now. And the question is, do you have the minimal decency to end it or not, which the U.S. could do because of its instrumental U.S. support for Israel. And none of these people do because they don't want to take on the Israel lobby and because they're just a bipartisan consensus around supporting Israel no matter what and brutalizing Palestinians. And that's the problem here. The vision is clouded by hegemony and supremacy. And hence why they have to talk about these far off distant visions, like one day maybe this political future for the Palestinian people, which we're never going to do anything to actually achieve.
Well, like Mariah Carey said, I had a vision of love, and it was all that you've given to me. Just a vision, nothing else.
There we go. Yes. And again, notice how when they talk about the status quo, we can't go back to the status quo. The problem is not confining 2.3 million people in Gaza to a concentration camp and controlling their every movement and limiting how many calories they can consume as Israel did, and bombing them periodically. The problem is Hamas. That's the status quo we can't go back
to.
Occupation is fine. The people that are able to resist, that's not fine. And we can never allow that again.
It's all about what harms Israel.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough for this clip. We have more from John Feiner, though, because there are some people within his party, a small group of people who are calling for a ceasefire. and even calling this a genocide. Rashid Tlaib called this a genocide. And that's awkward for the Biden White House. And so this is how John Feiner is going to respond.
Under growing pressure, the president has been under growing pressure from Democrats here at home to do more to end the fighting. We've seen protests as well. Probably the harshest is Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I'm going to show what she put up on Friday. She said Joe Biden supported the genocide of the Palestinian people. The American people won't forget Biden. Support a ceasefire now or don't count on us in 2024. Your response?
Look, we strongly disagree with some of that messaging and with some of the terms used to describe this conflict. But what I will say is we know that this is a conflict about which there are strong views on all sides, including in the United States, including, frankly, even within the United States, the Biden administration about the conduct of this conflict. We have seen some of that spill out into the public. We have seen strong comments made by members of Congress. We respect the fact that there are people who have deep personal ties to this conflict in a way that may be unusual in terms of recent world events. All that said,
so he's basically saying Rashida Tlaib has deep personal ties in a way that may be unusual.
Yeah, it's unusual to be a Palestinian. That's what he's basically saying.
Yeah,
it's unusual. It's strange. It's like
but
so exotic.
But it's so wonderful that he has that big heart and generosity to be okay with that, to understand her emotionality because she's Palestinian. She's an unusual member of Congress.
Yes.
So he's going to allow for her. I mean, it's such gaslighting and such condescension. And no, you don't have to be Palestinian to see this as genocide. I mean, the truth is she doesn't see Palestinians as subhumans, which a lot of members of Congress do. But that's not because she's some kind of irrational, emotional, hot mess of a person. It's because she is Palestinian. But you don't have to be Palestinian to see them as human beings. These guys should try it.
Some of the characterizations and the terms used, we believe, have technical definitions, have certain historical resonance and weight, and that we do not accept their application to this particular war, even as we continue to raise our serious concerns about the toll that this is taking on civilian life and the need to do even more to protect it.
Even more? How could they do even more? How could Israel do even more? They're doing so much to protect lives. They're telling people to leave. They're telling people to evacuate hospitals, which is so easy. You know, when you're plugged into something, really easy to just wheel away with the generator, I guess. If you're on a ventilator or if you're on an incubator, or if you're a baby or injured, it's so easy to just get up and move. Or they'll tell you to leave and then they'll bomb you as you're leaving. Or they'll tell you to leave and then they'll bomb where you've gone to. They really take so many measures.
Yeah, so they're offended that Rashida Tlaib calls this a genocide. You know, Biden, weeks into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, called that a genocide, like within weeks. And already now, within weeks of Israel's bombardment of Gaza, Israel's killed more people than Russia has in nearly 2 years, including more children. So within a week of Russia invading, that was a genocide, according to Biden. Now Israel's already killed more people after nearly 2 years. Israel's already killed more people after just 3 weeks, but that's not a genocide. They're offended by that. And anyone who says that is emotional. And they must have
emotional, and they have an unusual,
yes.
They suffer from unusual Palestinianism.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Let's go on to Jen Psaki, because she is, of course, the former spokesperson for the Biden White House. And
she continues to serve as the spokesperson for the Biden White House, just in the form of being a journalist.
Yes. And a part of her duties is to basically tone police, language police, Democrats who, like Rashida Tlaib, who dare criticize the White House and call this a genocide. So here she is scolding Pramila Jayapal, the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, about Rashida Tlaib falling out of line.
By the way, Aaron's saying that they killed more civilians. Someone in the comments is saying Ukraine has lost over 100,000 troops.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. It's civilians. Yes. Good distinction.
And genocide, language also matters. And genocide is...
Language matters, guys. Language matters.
defined as the intentional destruction of an entire ethnic or religious group. And a lot of people do listen to statements made by members of Congress. So I just want to be clear. Do you agree that with a description of this as genocide and the president's role in that?
I mean, could that be more of a leading question?
Yeah.
Words matter. And
Words
someone
matter.
called this genocide. And words have power, and people are going to listen to that. Can you please disavow it's genocide? And you know, I just want to show something because words do matter. I tweeted something out in case people are curious about genocide's definition. And Roz Siegel, who is literally an Israeli historian of Holocaust studies and genocide studies, wrote at Jewish Currents that this is a textbook case of genocide. And if you go through the different screenshots, I show why, but he shows why. But go to the next one. So he lays out why under international law this is genocide. And I think he knows better than Jen Psaki, since words matter. I think he knows better about that. But yeah, under international law, the crime of genocide is defined by the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethical, racial, or religious group as such. In its murderous attack on Gaza, Israel has loudly proclaimed this intent. And then he goes through all the different quotes of Israeli leaders. And so that's the nice thing about what Israel's doing, is that they're such entitled, coddled, genocidal monsters that they say the stuff out loud that other governments wouldn't say out loud. So in a way, they're doing us a favor. And if there were any justice, they'd be taken to The Hague, and that would be used against them. But as Norman Finkelstein says, The Hague and, you know, the ICC is the International Criminal Court, is really the International Caucasian Court, meaning that the chances of being gone after in the international human rights community, if you're not an African leader, are very low. All right. So now that we know that an Israeli historian, among others, has said that this is genocide, Jen, makes me want to commit genocide. Genocide with Jen. There you go, everyone. You're welcome.
I am not willing to say that yet, but I will just tell you that Rashida is not the first person to say this. There are credible reports from agencies across the world, and the United Nations has said we are hurtling towards the genocide of Palestinians. That is not an isolated view, but I think it is important for us to focus on what is actually here at the core, which is over 9,000, I think it's somewhere near 9,300 Palestinians have been killed, over 3,000 children, plus 6,600 Palestinian children killed. And I think that where are 2.3 million Palestinians going to go? Where are they going to go? The attacks on the refugee camps, we are talking about a half a mile for this refugee camp. That is the density of how many people live in that area. When you release bombs that are actually 2,000-pound bombs in a dense area, which is something the United States has signed on and said we will not do that, but Israel has not said that. That is what Israel did in the Jabalia refugee camp. 2,000-pound bombs, Jen. And so the horrors are terrible. I think there are families of hostages, Israeli hostages, who have gone to the ICC and said what Hamas did is also a war crime and qualifies as genocide. And I think we have to make sure that we are taking into account all the innocent civilians, Israeli and Palestinian. But at the end of the day, international humanitarian law exists because we have learned from our past that you cannot solve these problems by targeting innocent civilians. And the United States has to be very, very clear about this.
And Jen Psaki's like, yeah, I don't really care about all that. I just want to make sure that we're not criticizing dear leader Biden.
Right.
Can we stop with that?
Yeah,
Yes.
Joseph, Saint Joseph.
Okay, well, let's hear from another progressive Democrat, Bernie Sanders.
Oh my God, this is painful.
One thing. I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries,
as opposed to Israel, which is just
Right.
dedicated to peace and tranquility and living in harmony, and in the process, killing thousands of children and other innocents as it carpet bombs one of the most densely populated areas in the world. But yeah, it's Hamas that cannot be negotiated with. You can't have a ceasefire with. So how are you supposed to end the war then, basically? What Bernie's saying there is he endorses Israel's operation with some occasional pauses. That's what he's telling us here.
By the way, I just have to address this. Someone in the comments wrote she should ask him about his dual citizenship. That's not a way that we fight for Palestinian rights, by like leaning into anti-Semitic tropes. He's not a dual citizen. He sucks on this issue. It's not because he's Jewish. All right. That's your like PSA
in
of
the
the day.
region understand that Hamas
Absolutely
has
not
got
saying that.
to go. So what we need right now, the immediate task right now, is to end the bombing, to end the horrific humanitarian disaster, to go forward with the entire world for a two-tier, two-state solution to the crisis, to give the Palestinian people hope.
Senator.
Okay, so he's totally incoherent. He says we need an end to the bombing, but then he says we can't have a ceasefire. So he's just putting forward this talking point of a humanitarian pause. And if you're not willing to do anything, like if you call for an end to the bombing, but you're not willing to demand anything concrete, like saying we have to condition U.S. military aid on Israel stopping the bombing, then Israel doesn't care, because Israel is not being actually threatened with anything. So what Bernie's basically doing, he's endorsing the Israeli campaign, even though he thinks he's criticizing it. And he's endorsing their stated aim of destroying Hamas, which means destroying Gaza, because that's what Israel is doing. And this is the same Bernie who in 2016 spoke pretty boldly about defending Palestinian rights. He called out Hillary Clinton for supporting the Israeli occupation. And it's like that Bernie is a distant memory now. He's back to the old Bernie, the pre-2016 Bernie, who supported Israel's 2014 operation against Gaza. And it's strange. He was once the leader of the progressives in this country, and I thought he had a conscience, but he's showing himself to be completely devoid of one here.
Yeah, it's really incredibly disappointing. And no, he's not Israeli.
But he was deemed so useful by AIPAC, the top Israel lobby group.
That is the worst sign
AIPAC
ever.
even tweeted out this part of this clip afterwards, because here he was opposing a ceasefire. So AIPAC deemed that to be useful enough to promote. So
He
congrats
did
to
tweet
Bernie.
something critical of AIPAC. I guess he was embarrassed.
Yeah, sure. He should have been embarrassed.
He should be
but
embarrassed. This is
AIPAC
he's
wants to
being a
use him.
Shonda. Yeah.
Yeah. So AIPAC's feeling the burn, and that's where we're at. Okay, let's move on. The Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Herzog, he was on Face the Nation.
Said no ceasefire without the return of hostages. How close are we in those negotiations to get hostages freed?
We are making every effort to get hostages released. And when people talk about pause in the fighting, we are all for a pause that would allow for the release of hostages. Unfortunately, I'll explain the humanitarian issue, but unfortunately, it is not our impression that Hamas is serious about releasing them. They are playing for time. They're trying to stop our pressure and rearm and regroup themselves. When we see that they are serious about it, then we're all in. Nobody has to urge us. Most of the kidnaps are Israelis, and our government is responsible to the families. So nobody has to urge us on this.
But the White House had said it was a test case and a successful one to have those 2 Americans and then those 2 Israelis released. Why do you think hostage talks are not successful now?
Because Hamas is playing for time, because Hamas is trying to stop our military efforts, and I think the more pressure we put on them, the more chances there are that they may agree to release hostages.
So, first of all, he says playing for time twice because it's an obvious talking point. And he says it's not our impression that they're serious. So the obvious follow-up from a journalist would be, what would give you the impression that they're serious? And because Israel has never stated its condition for either ceasefire or hostage release.
Yeah. Well, their only condition is Hamas's complete surrender.
Right.
That's which is not going to happen.
Right. Well, sorry, I should have said like a remotely realistic one. Right.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Hamas says that hostage or captives have been killed so far in the Israeli strikes. So that's how much Israel cares about the captives, is that they're willing, apparently, if what Hamas is saying is true, and they shouldn't be taken on faith, but they might be telling the truth, that the Israeli bombings are killing some of these captives. And they did release those 4 people already. And that's, I don't know, could that be not seen as a sign of that maybe more could follow if Israel was willing to engage in negotiations? And what is Hamas's demand? They want the release of Palestinian captives and hostages in Israeli prisons, because there are thousands of them. And that's what Hamas wants. There's a precedent of that. There have been these prisoner exchanges before that could be tried again. But Israel doesn't want to do that. Israel doesn't want to deal with Hamas. They just want to inflict massive damage on the people of Gaza to punish them for the fact that Hamas is their ruler. The New York Times had this line the other day that said the Israeli military's aura of power was shaken on October 7th.
Right.
So
that's what this is about.
Because the aura of power was shaken, basically this idea that you have to be scared of Israel and see it as this like something you can't mess with. Because of that, you have to slaughter all these civilians. I think that's what it comes down to.
Right. And they know they're not really getting to Hamas.
That is correct. The same article says that U.S. officials say that Israel's failed to kill none of Hamas's senior leadership so far, or achieve any of its supposed goals in weakening Hamas. So that was a quiet admission in the New York Times.
Absolutely disgusting.
And so even according to the stated aims of Israel's operation, they're failing. But of course, the stated aims are not the real aims. The real aims are just to terrorize the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
And just carpet bomb it, because Israel can't, as an occupying power, cannot tolerate any acts of resistance. So the people there have to know their place by being destroyed and mass murdered. Yeah, listen, this is from the Times. One senior U.S. defense official said the operations so far have not come close to destroying Hamas's senior and middle leadership ranks. So that's a slight correction of what I said. I said that they said they haven't killed anybody. It really is. They haven't come close to destroying Hamas's senior and middle leadership ranks, which means they're not going after Hamas militants. They're going after civilians. Okay, let's move on to Lindsey Graham.
Right, that is the administration right that Israel needs to do more to protect civilians in Gaza?
Well, I think Israel is committed to following the law of armed conflict. One thing I want to say for sure is Israel's not engaged in genocide. And then another thing we need to deal with is the whitewashing of the status of people in Gaza. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love to be free from Hamas, but the most radicalized people on the planet live in the Gaza Strip. They've been taught since birth to kill and hate the Jews. How do you teach math in Gaza? If you had 10 Jews and you kill 6, how many would be left? That's been in their school system. So I'm all for.
So this is a part of the genocide playbook. You demonize civilian populations and basically paint a target on their back. Say they're worthy of being slaughtered because they're all radical, because they're the most radicalized people.
It's almost like what's interesting is that's his response to whether there's a genocide. That has no bearing on whether there's a genocide. Like you just said, He's basically implying, don't get upset about this because these are a bunch of anti-Semites. The implication is like, well, there needs to be a genocide. It's unfortunate, but what else are you going to do?
Yeah, which is genocidal rhetoric 101.
Right.
And he's projecting. Him and his colleagues are the most radicalized people on earth because nobody is more willing to openly support and fund genocide, mass slaughter of innocent civilians. And, there's this trope about, Gaza's people are so radicalized, they're taught to hate Jews. I went there once. I went there 20 years ago. And, I spoke to some children. And yeah, when they talked about Israel, they talked about the Jews and, how Jews are trying to kill them. But what else are they supposed to call them when Israel calls itself the Jewish state?
Israel makes us so much less safe as Jews.
If someone's trying to kill you and they call themselves something, you're going to call them by their name, like by how they self-identify. Israel's the self-proclaimed Jewish state from the river to the sea. And so that's how people of Gaza are going. That's what they're going to call them.
Right.
And Lindsey Graham thinks because of that, because they recognize that Israel's trying to destroy them as a nation, that they're somehow the extremists. So he's projecting, obviously.
Right. He would really like them to say the Zionists, because we know not all Jews are a monolith.
Providing humanitarian aid in a fashion that doesn't help Hamas. I'm all for Israel having the time and space to destroy Hamas. I'm all for a new governing regime over the Palestinian people when this is over. And I'm all for Israel and
a new governing regime over the Palestinian people. Wow. Sounds like he really believes in representative democracy. He wants basically a regime that he likes to control Palestinians.
Saudi Arabia reconciling. That's sort of where I'm at.
But no pause?
Sorta.
No humanitarian pause?
I don't want to take the pressure off Hamas militarily, but if Israel can find a way to help the humanitarian situation, yes, I'd like to do it. But after World War II, did anybody ask us these questions? You got to realize the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities in Japan to end the war. I think this is total war between Israel and Hamas. I want to protect innocent people as much as possible, but I want the world to realize that the radicalized population in Gaza has been going on for over a decade. This will not be easy. When you've been taught from birth to hate the Jews and kill them all and drive them into the sea, and here's what I think, 80% of the people in Gaza support the idea from the river to the sea. That has to change.
Yes, 80% of the people, it's actually 100% of the people of Gaza support freedom and support equality. And that's
got to change, Aaron.
Yeah, that's got to change. So they have to be carpet bombed because they support their own freedom, their own liberation.
Right. The people of Gaza remind me a lot of Hitler. So that's why the World War II analogy is so good, right?
Yeah, he says this is total war.
Yeah.
This is carpet bombing a besieged, caged population. Hamas doesn't have an army. They don't have tanks. They don't have air defenses. They have some rockets.
They're not invading other countries on a march, on a warpath.
There was one guerrilla operation that took years of planning on October 7th that did kill civilians. There were atrocities there, but that's not total war. That's a guerrilla operation that now is over. It was on one day, and now Hamas is hiding in tunnels, and the people of Gaza are the ones being carpet bomb. That's not a war. That's just a slaughter. That's all that is. And he supports that.
He does support that. And he even supports that genocide because it's against a radicalized population, as he says, as he sees it. I'm honestly amazed that there isn't more violence given the living situation that's been created.
Yeah. And, historically, I mean, people want to begin history at October 7th, but this has been going on since before May 1948, when Israel was officially founded. Already by the time Israel was founded, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homes. So it's been going on for that long. And yeah, when you compare all the violence that Israel's carried out, not just against Palestinians, but also against Lebanon as well, in Syria as well, this has been going on forever with full U.S. support. And yeah, the scale of violence on what Israel's faced versus what it's handed out, it's not comparable.
Right. At least he's honest. Someone writes he's not honest. That's the problem. I kind of implied that said, thank you for being honest. He's honest in a dishonest way. In other words, he makes it clear that he doesn't care if there's a genocide, but it would be even better for him to just admit there is a genocide. He's implicitly admitting it.
Okay, let's go to...
We're over time, but should we do one more clip?
Yeah, we can do one more. Let's go to actually Fareed Zakaria of CNN.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
And CNN has had journalists reporting from Israel for many weeks now. There was that famous clip of that CNN anchor, Sarah Snyder, basically repeating the Israeli government saying that dozens of babies were beheaded by Hamas.
Right.
And she said it was confirmed just because the Israeli government said it was confirmed. And of course, it turned out to be a complete lie. So that's been CNN so far. And CNN also employs former AIPAC lobbyist Wolf Blitzer. So really a neutral, objective organization over there. But now Fareed Zakaria of CNN is going to let slip a new phase of CNN's journalism when it comes to covering this war, which is they're embedding with Israeli forces and agreeing to let Israel approve of what they put on air.
Yesterday, CNN's Jeremy Diamond went into Gaza on an IDF embed. I should note that journalists embedded with the IDF in Gaza operate under the observation of Israeli commanders in the field and are not permitted to move unaccompanied within the Gaza Strip. As a condition to enter Gaza under IDF escort, outlets have to submit all materials and footage to the Israeli military for review prior to publication. CNN has agreed to these terms in order to provide a limited window into Israel's operations in Gaza. Jeremy joins me now.
So congrats to CNN on becoming an official appendage of the Israeli army and having your coverage from Gaza approved by the Israeli army. This is a milestone in journalism. It happened in Iraq where the U.S. Allowed media outlets to embed. I don't remember though. Maybe this happened there too. I doubt it though, where media groups submitted their footage prior to publication for approval. I don't remember that. Maybe it did, but certainly CNN letting a foreign government now approve their coverage as it embeds with them in their slaughter of an occupied population. That has to be a first.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder what Fareed thinks of that.
Well, Fareed's obviously fine with it, or otherwise he'd call it out, I think. Or
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but he's fine because he does what he's told. He's been better than other people on corporate news, which doesn't say much, but he's at least allowed on some Palestinian voices, which is more than you can say about other people. But by the way, what was missing this weekend from all these shows? On Saturday there was a massive protest in DC.
Yeah, right.
300,000 people estimated turned out to support Palestine, call for a ceasefire. No mention of that I saw in any of these clips.
Right.
And because
very important to point out that I guess my expectations were so low that didn't even stand out as missing. But you're right. Of course it's newsworthy.
Yeah.
And they didn't bring it up because it would be embarrassing to be like, "Hi, politician, you realize that you're misrepresenting all these people you're supposed to represent."
Yeah, and maybe the Israeli government wouldn't allow them to say that, given that CNN is submitting their coverage for approval now. Maybe they just assume that the Israeli military wouldn't like that either if they acknowledge massive protests against the slaughter of Gaza. So they just dropped that one too.
Right. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next week. I'm sure there'll be more terrible stuff for us to debunk and push back on.
Please like the stream so that we can reach more people, and go to usefulidiots.podcast.com to support the show and get bonus content. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, and if you do that, you'll find out who had their kid dress up as Zelenskyy.
That's right. One of our top U.S. officials had some really unoriginal, but symbolic costume ideas this week for his children.
Yeah. So the daughter's costumes suck though.
Yes.
The son had a much better, more fun costume. All right. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for joining. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.